Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well. Tonight we're learning Maseches Succah, Daf Nun Hey. As a scheduling note and a schedule change, our siyum will be on time tomorrow night here in the base medrash. Anyone who wishes to join could please send me or give me $15 and I will arrange for the food. Rabbi Schechter will be making the siyum in memory of his father, whose yortzeit is Taka Wednesday night, Thursday, which works out beautifully. Anyways, I prefer that other people do the siyum, so win-win. Rabbi Schechter will be bringing some extra food as well. If you'd like to join, please Venmo to my name, or you can send Chase QuickPay to my cell phone, or you can bring cash, check. I just don't take credit cards. That's where I stop.
This is Thursday.
No, this is going to be tomorrow night. Yeah, Thursday is going to be a blot and a half of the new Maseches Beitza. We're right now 6-7 lines from the bottom of Nun Daled Amud Beis, the second of the wide lines. Yesterday, we learned the shita of Rav Acha. Rav Acha was of the opinion that when a person has 2 korbanos musaf on a particular day, he as well has 2 sets of tkiyos on that day. Now, we batted around his shita a little bit yesterday to try and figure it out. It wasn't really working out so well. And today we're going to continue that until we reject his shita altogether. 7 lines from the bottom says the Gemara Meisive, we have a kashya against Rav Acha's shita that when there are multiple korbanos musaf, that you have to then bring, you have to then have 2 sets of tekiyos. What is the shaila against him? Says the Gemara. Rosh Chodesh Shechalios b'Shabbos. When you have Rosh Chodesh, which has 1 korban musaf, and you have Shabbos, which is a separate korban musaf, so then what do we do with the shiur of that day as it relates to these 2 korbanos musaf? So shiur shel Rosh Chodesh doche shiur shel Shabbos. So the halacha seems to be from this brisa that the shiur that we would have said for Rosh Chodesh is doche; it overrides the shiur shel Shabbos. Now, the Gemara is making an assumption here that there's a relationship between the shiur shel Shabbos and the tkiyos, and therefore, as follows. It seems to be that if you have your 2 korbanos, Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos, that Rosh Chodesh wins and Shabbos loses, implying that there's only 1 musaf that gets tkiyos, implying that Rav Acha is wrong. V'isa, if you would want to say that Rav Acha is correct, that every time there's a korban, there's a separate set of tekiyos, if that's true, then lema de Shabbos, v'lema de Rosh Chodesh, then the brisa should not have said that Rosh Chodesh is docha Shabbos, that the shiur that is sung during the korban musaf should be of Rosh Chodesh should override that of Shabbos. We should have both of them. So maybe we should assume, therefore, that this brisa proves that Rav Acha is wrong. Amar Rav Safra says, no, you cannot learn that from here. My doche, when the brisa says that the shiur of Rosh Chodesh is doche, the shiur of Shabbos, what did it mean? The Gemara answers, doche lekodem. It means it pushes it to be the first in line. Not that we only say Rosh Chodesh instead of Shabbos, but we actually say the shiur of Rosh Chodesh first, followed by the shiur of Shabbos, therefore substantiating or making possible for the shita of Rav Acha to exist, that each korban has its own entity of its own reality of tkiyos. So says the Gemara, that's very weird. If you have 2 things, why would we do the thing that's less common first? You have Rosh Chodesh and Shabbos. Shabbos happens every 7 days. Rosh Chodesh happens every 29 or 30 days. So says the Gemara, Ve'amai, why would Rosh Chodesh, the shiur for Rosh Chodesh, why would that come before Shabbos? Asks the Gemara based on the famous principle, Tadir v'she'eno tadir, tadir kodem. When you have 2 things and you're trying to put them in sequence, and one of them is tadir, one of them is commonplace, and the other is less commonplace, the one that's tadir should be first. Why then do we have it that Rosh Chodesh is being put before Shabbos? Where 4 lines from the bottom on Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara says the reason why we had to put the shiur of Rosh Chodesh first was to calm and allay some of the fears of some of the people in the crowd. Amar Rav Yochanan, Leida shehukba Rosh Chodesh bismano, so that everyone will know that in fact Rosh Chodesh was established properly. And therefore, you're right. Generally speaking, we employ the rule of tadir v'she'eno tadir, tadir kodem. And had it been that rule applied in this case, we would have had the korban of Shabbos taking place before the korban of Rosh Chodesh. But here, because we had a reason to deviate from that normal rule of Tadir, here we had to show that there was a kviyas to the Rosh Chodesh. Therefore, we did the one that was Rosh Chodesh first. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. The high hekera of dinan, is this the heker? Is this the thing that we do to indicate that that Rosh Chodesh actually was established properly. After all, we have another one. Ha'hekera acharisa avdinan. We have another one. Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, Chelve tamid shel shachar. When it comes to the fats of the tamid shel shachar, I'll just say right now that the line we need is at the bottom of the page and another line from here, but we'll learn a couple of other nekudos first. The Brisa opens in regards to the fats of the tamid shel shachar. Where were they put? Nisnin mechatzi kevesh ulamata b'mizrach. They were put on the ramp, on the lower half of the ramp to the east side, away from the Heichal. That's what we did with the fats. What about Bishal Musafin? Of Musafin, what did we do with those body parts? Nisnen mechatzi kevesh ulamata. That was also put on the lower half of the ramp, but b'mayrav, on the western side. Bishal Rosh Chodesh, and this is the one that we need, Bishal Rosh Chodesh. What did we do with the parts of the animal for Rosh Chodesh? Says the Gemara, Nisnin tachas Charkov hamizbech ulamata. They were placed in a unique and uncommon place. Where did we put the body parts of the animal that was shechted for Rosh Chodesh? They were placed toward the top of the mizbech. The Charkov was like the threshold between the top of the ramp where it then flattens out and meets the mizbech. So that is where we put them, and that's not really where it should have been. And as we turn to the top of Nun Hey Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, the Amar of Yochanan, Leidasha Hukba Rosh Chodesh Bizmano. The reason why we put the body parts of the Korban Rosh Chodesh at the top of the ramp is to show us a heker that really Rosh Chodesh was established properly. So that really poses our question. You wanted to say on the toward the bottom of the page that the reason why in the Brisa, 7 lines from the bottom of the page, the reason why the shiur shel Yom of Rosh Chodesh was said before the shiur shel Yom of Shabbos, even though Rosh Chodesh is less common than Shabbos, the reason why was to remind us that Rosh Chodesh was in fact established correctly. So the Gemara says, but we already had that. We had it somewhere else. We knew from the placement of the body parts of the animals that Rosh Chodesh was hukbah because it was placed up by the top of the Mizbeach. So says the Gemara, good. So we have 2 reminders. Yeah, sometimes you set 2 alarms when you need to get yourself out of bed, and sometimes you have another person wake you up. Says the Gemara, Trei Hakera Avdinan. We have 2 things that are showing us that in fact Rosh Chodesh was established correctly. The Chazi Hai Chazi, one who sees this one will see this one. With the Chazi Bahai Chazi, the one who sees this one will see this one. It doesn't make a difference. So we tried to reject the Shita of Rav Acha, and we were unable to do so, but we're going to try again. And this time we have a very, very direct source against Rav Acha. Let's review again. Rav Acha was of the opinion that whenever 2 days coincided, where each of those 2 days had a Korban Musaf, and therefore on that day, let's say Rosh Chodesh, that falls out to be on Shabbos, you're supposed to bring 2 Korbanos Musaf. So the halacha is that with each of those Korbanos Musaf, Rav Acha posited that you should say 9 tkiyos for each of them, totaling 18 sets. So says the Gemara, 3 lines down, hold on one second. Tani Rava Bar Shmuel. Rava Bar Shmuel brought a brisa. Yachol, you might have thought that kishem shetoken al Shabbos bifnei atzmo ve'al Rosh Chodesh bifnei atzmo. Just like when Shabbos is by itself and it has a korban, you blow tkiyos. And had it been Rosh Chodesh by itself that you would blow tkiyos, maybe we would assume kach hayu token al kol musaf u'musaf. We would also do that whenever they coincide. This is basically Rav Acha's shita, right? It's exactly what he says. Talmud lomar that Rav Acha is wrong, because the pasuk says of Roshei Chodshechem. So what do we see? Rav Acha wanted to say that whenever you have 2 or even 3 days where the Korban Musaf coincide and they're happening at one right after the other sequentially on that day, that each of them gets a set of tkiyos. The Brisa says is specifically and explicitly not like Rav Acha. So says the Gemara using well-known language, Tiyufta de Rabbi Acha, Tiyufta. This is an excellent rejection of Rabbi Acha. Why? Because Rabbi Acha is saying something that's literally the opposite of a brisa. The brisa says you might have thought you have 2 sets of tkiyos. You don't. What did Rav Acha say? You have 2 sets of tkiyos. Tiyufta de Rav Acha tiyufta. So now the Gemara is a little bothered by this brisa because the brisa doesn't give much more than the words uvroshei chodshechem. How do the words uvroshei chodshechem teach us that you only have 1 set of tkiyos and not 2? Because that's what the brisa indicated. Answers the Gemara with a couple of different answers, 6 lines down on Hey Amud Aleph. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, let me teach you how to read the pasuk. Amar Kra, when the Torah says of Roshei Chodshechem, Hukshu, we make a comparison between Kol Chadashim Kulam Zelazeh. We make a comparison between all of the months of the year. Now, what is common to almost all of the months of the year? What's common is that they usually don't coincide with Shabbos. Most Rosh Chodeshes don't coincide with Shabbos. Just think about the math. If Shabbos, let's say the first Rosh Chodesh of the year is Shabbos, and it's every 29 or 30 days, then the next Rosh Chodesh is going to be Sunday or Monday. The next one's going to be Monday or Tuesday. It's very rare. It happens, but it's very rare. So the Gemara says, Abaye explains 8-9 lines down on Nun Hey Amud Aleph. He says, when the Brisa says of Rosh Chodshechem, it's teaching us to look at all of the Rosh Chodeshes as what is the most common of them. And having multiple korbanos is uncommon. And that's what a Rosh Chodshechem means. But Rav Ashi gives a different answer. Rav Ashi Amar Ksiv, the way that the word is written is without a yud, Chodshechem. The pasuk reads Chodshechem in the plural, but it's read the way that it looks, the way that it appears without the letter yud is Chodshechem. Uksiv uvroshe. It's an interesting pasuk. Now let's read the pasuk according to his interpretation. Instead of saying uvroshe Chodshechem, it's uvroshe Chodshechem. In the heads of your singular month. And says the Gemara, ve'ezeh Chodesh sheyesh lo shnei roshim. What month is it that has two heads, two parts to that? Have Omer, what is right up upon us next week, Emir Hashem? Have Omer ze Rosh Hashanah. What do we know about Rosh Hashanah? V'Omer Rachmana Chodshechem Chadhi. That on that day, even though it's true that it's also Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Hashanah, which have different chiyuvim, we only bring one korban. Right? That's what it seems from here, at least. So says the Gemara, this is an excellent rejection of the Shita of Rav Acha, and we had a little trouble understanding the Brisa. What does it mean of Rosh Chodshechem? Abaye and Rav Ashi gave their answers. The Odin, furthermore, we have more evidence that rejects Rav Acha. Tanya, we have a Brisa that reads, Becholo shel moed, in Chol HaMoed, what shiur shel yom do we say on each of these days? We don't do this, but this is what the Brisa writes. On Chol HaMoed, what shiur shel yom do we say on day one? Berishon al mahayu omrim. So the paragraph they would say was Havu Lashem b'nei Elim. B'sheni mahayu omrim. On the second day of Chol HaMoed, what shiur shel yom would we read? Ule Rasha Amar Elokim. A different paragraph to him. B'shlishi, on the third day mahayu omrim, we read Mi yakum li im mireim. This is what we say on Wednesdays. B'revi mahayu omrim, on the fourth day of Chol HaMoed, what was the shiur shel yom? Bino bo'arim ba'am. Okay, and b'chamishi mahayu omrim, what was the shiur shel yom of that day? Hasirosim yisebel shechmov kapav midu tavorna. B'shishi, on the sixth day, what would we say? Mahayu omrim yimotu kol mosadei aretz. And now here is the key line: v'imchal Shabbos be'echad mehem. If Shabbos coincides with any of these days of Chol HaMoed, the halacha is yimotu yidche. We get rid of one of the tehillims. We get rid of them, showing that Shabbos, the korban musaf of Shabbos and of Chol HaMoed, they clash. They clash with one another. And again, a strong rejection of Rav Acha, who wanted to say that they have separate worlds, and each of them is going to be able to have their own tekiyos. So now, how do we remember all the shiur shel yom? The Gemara presents a mnemonic here. We're 2/3 of the way down, about 12 lines or so from the bottom of the page. Rav Safra manach buhu simana humbahi. Sounds like an African word. It says that I don't speak African, but it sounds like that, right? I'm going to pick another language. It says humbahi. It's hey, vav, mem, beis, hey, yud. Go look through all the psukim from day one till the end. You'll see that it matches very well. Rav Papa, he had a little different one. He didn't say that it was humbahi, mem, beis, hey in the middle, but he said it's humhabi. Rav Papa, manach bu simna, humhabi. He felt that the fourth and fifth ones were switched around. You can look back in the psukim to see how they align. V'simanech. How do we know which one we paskin like? So the Gemara uses a catchphrase that they used to have back in the day that includes the name of Rav Safra and something similar to his acronym. Says the Gemara, V'simanech, how should we remember how we hold? Ambuha de Sifrei. And Ambuha de Sifrei means a gathering or a convoy of Sifrei, of teachers. Now, Sifrei is like Safra, and the Mem and the Beis and the Hey here are organized like the Shita of Rav Safra, and therefore, based on this mnemonic, it seems clear that we hold like that. Now, what we see from here, from a few lines up, is that because when Shabbos coincides with one of these days, we push off the shiur shel yom of that day for Shabbos, Tiyuvta de Rav Acha bar Chanina, Tiyuvta. We reject him entirely. So says the Gemara, all right, look, you've done a really good job of pushing against Rav Acha, but I have one last question for you. The problem with Rav Acha's Shita, even though in logic it may be difficult, the problem is that his Mari Makomos are excellent, first caliber sources. When Rav Acha quotes his Shita, if you were to look back on Nun Daled Amud Aleph, where his Shita is first quoted, which is halfway down, he came with a brisa. The Gemara says they're halfway down, that Rav Acha came from the south and he brought a brisa, and his brisa had a pasuk and a drasha. So asks the Gemara, all right, we're having a hard time with him, but 6 lines from the bottom, how are you undoing his source? It's fine if you don't agree with him, but he has gorgeous Mari Makomos. If he's going to say that the two korbanos musaf should be treated separately, and he has a pasuk in Chumash and mamish a brisa that match exactly what he's saying, you have to answer that question. It's a great question. So says the Gemara, I can answer that question in 2 different ways. Says the Gemara, 5, 6 lines from the bottom, Amar Ravina, how should I understand the sources of Rav Acha? The pasuk that Rav Acha had used as quoted on the previous page was Uvnei Aharon HaKohanim Yiskeu b'chatzotzros. So how do we answer that? Shema arichim b'tkiyos. All it means is that they were ma'arich, that they had longer tekiyos, but not that they should be each one distinct in their own right to get their own tekiyos. Rabbanan de Kesari mishmid Rav Acha, the Rabbanan of Kesari answering in the name of Rav Acha Amre, they said Lomar shemar betoken, that the pasuk means that yiskeu in the plural, that they had a lot of people who were tokeya. It wasn't just one person who was about tokeya; they had a lot of people being tokeya. Good. End of sugya. And Bekitzer Nimratz, we reject the shita of Rav Acha Bar Chanina, seemingly from the flow of the Gemara, and his shita that we have a separate set of tekiyos for each korban musaf is rejected. You are all familiar with the liturgy, with the siddur that we have in Chol HaMoed. And those of us who live in America, live in Chutz La'aretz, when we say the psukim in Chol HaMoed musaf, we always say for 2 days during Chol HaMoed, Bayom HaSheni v'Yom HaShlishi, Bayom HaShlishi v'Yom HaRavi, Bayom HaRavi v'Yom HaChamishi. Why do we do that? We do that because of what we refer to as Succah Yoma. We're not exactly sure. We are now calendarically sure, but back in the day, we're not exactly sure as to when Kviya D'Yarcha was, when Rosh Chodesh actually started. And because of that, we keep 2 days of Yontif. But if you keep 2 days of Yontif, it's a bizayon to the second day of Yontif to also read the psukim as though it might be Chol HaMoed. That's not respectful. So what we do is on the second day of Yontif, we read the psukim for the first day of Yontif, and we don't read the second day, the Chol HaMoed psukim on that day. We push them off to day 3 and then read days 2 and 3, or 3 and 4, and 4 and 5, and 5 and 6. These next 4 lines, it's not long, but these next 4 lines is that whole conversation. The Anan, those of us in Bavel, the Islan Tre Yome, for those of us who keep 2 days, Heichi Avdinan. How do we go about reading the psukim in the Shmona Esrei for Musa? Abaye Amar Sheni Yidche. Abaye says, we just end up omitting the psukim for what would be day 2, namely the first day of Chol HaMoed. We omit those psukim completely because there's no easy way to solve it. You can't say them on day 2 when you're keeping 2 days of Yontif because it's a zilzul of Yontif. That's not right. And then by the time you get to the next day, it's for sure not that day anymore. So we just skip it altogether. No, we do read day 2. However, on day 7, we end up skipping day 7. So he would just stagger. He would say that on the 3rd day of Sukkot, which is our first day of Chol HaMoed, we'd read days 2 and 3, and we'd end up skipping the 7th day's reading. Tanya Kavase, the Rava, the Brisa seems to write like Rava, that Imchal Shabbos Dios Be'echad Mehen Yimotu Yidcha, that we would of course push off, supporting his shita that it's Shvi, it's at the end, and it would push off. That's Yimotu, that it would be pushed off. But we don't paskin like either of these shitas. We paskin like these last 6 words on the page, 5 words on the page. Iskin Ameimar ben Naharda. Ameimar was in Naharda, and Iskin, he made a takana, demedalge diluge, that we would have this kind of overlapping. If this is 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, we would do this. We would have, right? But you have like over here, you're reading 2 days, and the next one you're reading the next 2 days, and it's always reading 2 parashios at a time, even though it's not really Svaradik, because it can't be both days. It can only be one of those days. But because of Succah Yoma, and because of our need to read the psukim of that korban mamish during Musaf, we therefore add both. And that's why we have our Siddurim the way that they are, based on this explanation of Ameimar at the bottom of the page. That brings us to the top of Nun Hamid Beis to a Mishnah. For those of you who don't have sheets, highly recommended. It's a totally separate chag. In what regard?
Isn't there an overlap that it could be the last day of Sukkot?
So that's interestingly, that's the shita. Oh, it's not Chol HaMoed though. That day, right? We don't treat it that way.
That sounds more like Rav.
What? Sounds a lot more like Rav. Sounds a lot more like Rav. But we don't read that. We treat it as Yontif Mamish. Yeah. What? Yeah.
Okay, all you accountants out here.
Well,
Smiling.
This chart was not made by an accountant, so don't get too excited. It's my extent of Excel knowledge. So, I'm done now. All right. I sent this out to those of you who are not here. It's on WhatsApp. Just a little bit of a little chart to explain things. Okay, the Torah tells us that when it comes to the holiday of Sukkot, that we are obligated to bring on day one, as you look in the chart, on day one of Sukkot, you bring 13 bulls, and it lowers one number every day throughout the Chag until on the seventh day of Sukkot, you end up bringing 7 bulls. As well, on each of those days, there were 3 other korbanos, as we will soon see in our Mishnah. So looking in column 3, the number of total animals that were sacrificed on those days, the number of bulls that were sacrificed plus the other korbanos is 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. However, there were also the korbanos musaf. The korbanos musaf were brought every day. They're separate of the bulls. Those were kvasim. And that was 14 animals that stayed consistent every day. So here's how things worked out. I'm going to say this outside, and then we're going to learn the Mishnah, because when I learned the Mishnah, not knowing what I was talking about, I had no clue what was going on. It took Kahati helped me, and Art Scroll helped me, and the shiur that I was listening to helped me. It was very hard to figure out. So here is the way things work. On day one, there were the 13 bulls, and throughout the Chag, all 24 mishmaros of Kohanim were active, and each of those mishmaros took one of the korbanos of the bulls. So let's say on day one, they took one of the 16. If you look in column 4, there were 16 animals. So look in the top, what does it say? Number of mishmaros for the bulls and other korbanos. So they did 13 plus 3. Of the 24 mishmaros, 16 of the mishmaros took one of the korbanos in columns 2 and 3 on day one. So they did 16. How many mishmaros are left? 8. So the remaining mishmaros of 8 were the 8 mishmaros. They were the ones who brought the korbanos of the kvasim. And then on day 2, where we lowered the number of bulls, so then now there's only 12 bulls, 3 other korbanos. Instead of 16 like it was on day 1, there's only 15 mishmaros that are working, which means that now instead of there being only 8 mishmaros left, there are 9 left to give out the korbanos that are kvasim. And because of that, the rest of the chart should then start to make sense. We're going to read through the Mishnah now. And with that as a background, hopefully we will have some excellent clarity here. We'll be stopping at the Mishnah toward the bottom of this page. And then I already mentioned this, but I'll say it again while we're here, that the siyum will be tomorrow night instead of Thursday night. Tomorrow is the actual night of the siyum, which is what it should be. We'll be having it here in the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Shechter will be doing the siyum in memory of his father. Tomorrow night will actually be his yortzeit. Anyone who'd like to join is welcome to pay $15. I've got some cash up here already. Venmo, Chase Quickly, please feel free to be mitzdarif. Would love to have all of you. It'll be here in the Beis Medrash, regular time, 8:40, followed by a siyum and a suda to follow. All right, let's learn the Mishnah. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Chag. On the first day of Sukkot, Hayusham Yud Gimel Parim. On that day, there were 13 parim. And what were the other couple of korbanos? Elim Shnaim Usiir Echad. That number stayed consistent on every day. But on day 1, there was the 13 parim plus these other 3 korbanos, which is 16. So the first 16 of the 24 mishmaros would shecht one of each of these animals. Fine. If 16 mishmaros were taken care of, and there were 24 mishmaros, there are 8 mishmaros left. What did the 8 mishmaros do? Nishtai Rusham Yud Kvasim. The 14 kvasim for the korban musaf, who took care of that? That was the Shmona mishmaros for the remaining 8. Now the Mishnah is going to go through each day. And as I read, if you scan over day 1, then all of this will hopefully make sense. Day 1, day 2, day 3. Here's B'yom HaRishon. B'yom HaRishon, we saw Shisha Makrivin Shnei Masar. On the first day, we know that there were that the first 16 animals were taken care of, and there are 14 korbanos that need to be shechted by the remaining 8 mishmaros. So says the Gemara, B'yom Rishon, on the first day where there were 14 korbanos and 8 mishmaros left. How did they get to 14? Well, Shisha, the first 6 of the 8, Makrivin Shnayim. The first 6 groups would do 2 each, so that's 6 times 2 is 12. And the last 2 of the 8 would each bring 1. 14 plus 2 is 16. 12 plus 2, is 14. So there was Shisha, Makrivin, Shnayim. 6 of the Mishmaros would each bring 2. And then the remaining 2 Mishmaros would each bring 1, and that totals 14. Bisheni, on the second day in the chart, where we now have only 15 15 mishmaros who did korbanos. So b'sheni, then how did we do the 14 korbanos of the kvasim? Chamisha makrivin, 5 of the 9 of the now 9 remaining mishmaros. 5 of the 9 would be makriv shnayim, and that brings us to 10. The shiur, and the remaining 4 would each do echad, and that brings us to again the total of 14. And that's how we got all of the korbanos kvasim done. What about b'shlishi? What about on the 3rd day? On the 3rd day, there was 1 less bull. There were only 11 bulls left. So there were a total of 14 mishmaros who ended up doing the first 14 korbanos. How did we end up doing the 14 kvasim? Says the Gemara, b'shlishi, on the 3rd day, Dalid, 4 were makriven, shnayim. 4 of the mishmaros each did 2. So that brings us to 8. And we still have another 6. We have 6 more mishmaros, each of them doing 1 to bring us to a total of 14 kvasim. But Revi, on the 4th day, where we don't have 13, 12, or 11 bulls, we only have 10. And in order to take care of the primary korbanos, we only needed 13 mishmaros. That means that we had 11 mishmaros left to do 14 korbanos. How did that work out? But Revi, when we were on the 4th day, then shlosha makrivin shnayim, then 3 of the mishmaros would each sacrifice 2 of the kvasim. 3 times 2 is 6. And we said that there was going to be a total of 11 mishmaros. So each of the remaining 8 mishmaros, v'ashar echad, and 6 plus 8 is 14. And b'chamishi, on the 6th day, where now we only have 9 bulls and a total of 12 korbanos that day, that means that we have 12 mishmaros available to do the 14 kvasim. So b'chamishi, on that 5th day, when we had 12 mishmaros available for 14 kvasim, b'chamishi, on that 5th day, shnayim makrivin shnayim, 2 of the mishmaros would each bring 2, that's 4. And then, because on that day we had 12, so then we have an additional 12 mishmaros, we have an additional 10, b'hashar echad, and 4. 2 times 2, which is 4, plus an additional 10 equals 14, the number of kvasim. Bishishi, on the 6th day, where we only had 8 bulls, we had a total of 11 total mishmaros taking care of those first 11 animals. That means that we had 13 mishmaros left to give 14 korbanos. What did we do? Echad makriv shnayim. 1 of the mishmaros would bring 2 animals, the hashi'ar, and the remaining animals, the remaining 12 would end up bringing 1 each, and 2 plus 12 is going to be 14 yet again. But on the last day, take a look at the last line. On the 7th day of Succah, how many bulls were there? Only 7, and 7 plus 3 is 10. That means we had 14 groups to bring 14 kvasim. So therefore, each of them just brought 1. The shvi kulan shavin. Everyone gave the same exact amount of 1 each. I know that's a little confusing. You should do some chazar on this. After a couple of times, it starts to click, and this chart should hopefully be somewhat helpful. The Shmini, on the 8th day, now it's Shmini Atzeres, right? Because Sukkot is over. What did we do on the 8th day for korbanos? So it says the Gemara, B'Shmini chazri lepayis kibiragal. And we learned this already. There was a new pious, there was a new lottery in regards to who I should say of the mishmaros would have what to do, and therefore it was totally new and not part of this counting at all. That's why our chart ends at 7, because there was nothing to talk about. Amru, they said, Mishihikriv parim hayom lo yakriv lemachar. If there was someone who had the opportunity to shech the par on one of the days of Sukkot, then on the next day he shouldn't shech the par. He should shech something else. So that they wouldn't do them one day after another. Lo yakrib lemachar elachozrin chalila. It goes in a loop. Basically, all of the korbanos that we have, the parim are we don't want to do the same korban twice in a row. This is a discussion in the Rishonim, but that is what the Gemara says, and that brings what the Mishnah says. That brings us to the Gemara on Nun Hey Amud Beis at the last of the short lines, and the Gemara says, "Nema masnisin Rebbe hivelo Rabbanan." Maybe we should say that our Mishnah is like the Shita of Rebbe and not like the Rabbanan. Why? What does Rebbe say? Titania, the Brisa writes, Par haba b'shmini. If there is a cow that is brought on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeres betchila, mafisin alav, there is going to be a lottery. That's what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah said that b'shmini chazru l'fayis kibir regalim. So that makes perfect sense that Rebbe would be like our Mishnah. What do the Chachamim say that doesn't fit with our Mishnah? The Chachamim omrim, achas mishtei mishmaros delo shalshu beparim oso. He says that one of 2 of the mishmaros, they would not have an opportunity to do the par 3 times. Now, if you sit there and do the math, there were 70, there were 70, if you add up all the bulls, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, add them up, that will total 70. So if you have 24 mishmaros, so then it's not quite 3 times, right? It's not quite 3 times. Everyone got to do it twice, but the last couple of mishmaros didn't get to do that. That's what this Bryce is saying. The chachamim omrim achas mishtei mishmaros, one of the 2 mishmaros to lo shalshu, they didn't get to do this 3 times. So that shows us that the chachamim don't seem to work like our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says that it was a goral, that there was a lottery, but the chachamim say it's not a lottery. Whatever you get, you get. And therefore, maybe our Mishnah is like Rebbe and not like the sheets of the Rabbanon. Says the Gemara, no, afilu tema Rabbanon. We could even say it's like the Rabbanon. Atushte mishmaros la'afuse boy. Whatever groups are left that had not done a par for the 3rd time, that their mishmar had not shechted a par for the 3rd time, so they did a pious for those 2 groups, and therefore there still was a pious, and therefore our Mishnah could be understood even according to the Rabbanon. Says the Gemara, okay, that's good. Let's take a look now at the following brisa and see how to understand it. Says the Gemara, just about halfway down on Nun Ham with Beis. Keman Azla, like who does the following brisa go like? Keman Azla Hadatanya, as follows. Kol HaMishmaros, Shonos, Umishalshos, all of the Mishmaros got to do the shchita of the par at least twice, Umishalshos, and even 3 times. Chutz Mishne Mishmaros, Shoshonos, Vein Mishalshos. There were 2 groups, like we saw earlier, that could only have the opportunity to bring the par korban twice, but they wouldn't be able to do it 3 times. So Nema Rebbe Velo Rabbanon. Maybe we should also say, as we said before, that this brisa seems to be like the shita of Rebbe and not like the shita of the Rabbanon. Answers the Gemara, Afilu Tema Rabbanon. We could even say that it's like the Rabbanon. Milo shilshu. What shilshu? What does it mean that they didn't get to do this for the 3rd time? Says the Gemara b'pri hachag in regards to Sukkos. But they may very well have had the opportunity to do another korban when it came to Shmini Atzeres. Umay kamash malan. What does all of this come to teach us? Hakamash malan mishihikriv parm hayom lo yakriv lemachar. That someone who brings the par today should not bring the par tomorrow. And it shows you, how do we know that? Because they went in order. Mishmar 1, Mishmar 2, Mishmar 3. They went in order so that it ended up being that only at the end, some of the groups ended up not doing it 3 times. It wasn't like, oh, I'm Mishmar 1, so I do day 1, 2, 3. I get to do 3. No, it's not like that. It went in sequential order. And that's what this Mishnah is coming to teach us. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Hani Shivim Parim Keneged Me. Moving into Hashkafa territory. The Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar says, when we bring the 70 parim, because as mentioned, if you look at the chart in column 2, 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7, the number of korbanos brought on Sukkot was 70. There were 70 bulls. We just discussed like the Romanian factor here of how much animal that is. It is tens of thousands of pounds of meat. And that's just the cows. Forget about all the other animals, because there were 14 kvasim a day. That's 98 kvasim for korbanos musaf. A feast, an unbelievable amount of food. Some of them were olos, didn't all work out. But anyways, the Gemara says, what were these 70 for? What were these 70 korbanos for? Hani shivim parim keneged me. What's with the number 70? Says the Gemara, keneged shivim umos, to make sure that the nations of the world will get some degree of benefit. Par yechidi lama. So what about Shmini Atzeres? On that day, we don't bring 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 10, 8, 7. Why did we bring on that day only 1? Says the Gemara, keneged uma yechida. That was for the special one. That was for the unique one. Mashal melech basar v'dam. And the Gemara is going to conclude with this idea. The mashal is about a flesh and blood king. Sha'amar la'avadav, he says to all of his servants, I'm going to have a beautiful, huge meal. Everyone's invited. And then he says, Amar, but le'ohavo, but for the one that he loves, for the one that he's close to, ani ledodi v'dodi li, aseli suda ktana, kedesha ahana mimech. A quiet, candlelit meal, just the 2 of us. And this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says is the mashal. And this is where other midrashim say that Shmini Atzeres was all about koshe alai predaschem. I don't want you to leave me. I want to be with you. With the Shechina, everyone close. Yeah, big party on Sukkot. Kam Shmini Atzeres, candle at dinner, just me and a Kadosh Baruch Hu, or just a Kadosh Baruch Hu and me. Amar Rav Yochanan, Oy lahem le'ovdei kochavim. Nebach for those who are not of the tribe. She'avdu, they lost out, ve'ein yodin ma she'avdu. They didn't even know what they're missing out on. What's the Gemara talking about? Says the Gemara, Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam, when the Beis Hamikdash was standing, Mizbeach mechaper alein. Then they had the Mizbeach, v'chol hapachos, the 70 that were brought were mechaper on the umos ha'olam. But when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, v'achshav, me mechaper aleihen. Who's tending to their needs? Nobody. They didn't necessarily know. They never learned the Gemara. And hey, the Goy Dorais is not going to sit and learn a Daf Gemara. So how could it even be the case that they would have even known that it was for the Shivim Umos? They had no idea. So that's what the Gemara says with this poetic but frightening language. Avdu, ve'in yodin masha avdu. They have no idea what they lost. Baruch Hashem, we're part of the Yichida. We're the ones who are Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Kosh alai pedasim, I want to spend private time with you. We have a close relationship. We'll stop right here. Mirta Hashem, tomorrow we'll have a siyum. Any questions, please feel free to reach out. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
All right.
Back to the